Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Mike Okwache. It is believed that most countries of the world display varying levels of diversity in religion, culture, ethnicity, and politics. Now think of a diversity stretching from the Kalahari Desert to the Limpopo River, then add the wildlife-rich savannas to the beautiful sunset in the city. Your guess is as good as mine if it is a country situated at the southern tip of Africa. Talking about one of Africa's superpowers. South Africa has the continent's biggest economy, yet it is one of Africa's most unequal societies with millions of people poor and unemployed. But what are your assessments of the socio-economic situation in South Africa? Share your thought with us on Twitter at TVC Africa Today, or send an email to africatoday@tvcnews.tv. We'll take this report and Africa Today will be right back. Thanks for joining us.
This is the house that cost the South African state more than $20 million to renovate. That expensive renovation may now come back to haunt Zuma, as it could cost him millions of votes in the country's upcoming election. The president's sprawling homestead in Nkandla, KwaZulu-Natal has been upgraded at taxpayers' expense with a security fence, helipad and houses for his 4 wives and countless relatives. It's a galling sight for neighbors like Bekekile Ndlovu, who lives in a hut overlooking Zuma's residence.
It is disappointing, but we remain hopeful that our turn will come. We are hopeful. Maybe one day they will build us houses as well. He can see that we are suffering.
Nkandla Gate, as it's come to be known, has drawn attention to South Africa's stark inequality. A country where a third of its citizens live on less than $2 a day. It's also giving opposition parties ample ammunition against the ANC. The political stunt was enough to inspire many of Zuma's neighbors to sign on to Malema's party, the Economic Freedom Fighters. And across South Africa, the Nkandla scandal is turning many voters against President Zuma and his ruling ANC.
I think the ANC right now is sitting there with its heart beating very, very fast because it's a big issue in this election, this house.
President Zuma's popularity is at an all-time low. A recent survey shows that 51% of voters are clamoring for his resignation. He was even booed at Mandela's memorial service. The ANC may still win the election because of its role in liberating the country from white minority rule. But the multi-million-dollar mansion stands as a symbol of how the party of Mandela has lost its vision.
Right, it is 20 years since the end of apartheid in South Africa, and to ensure that many do not forget the heroes of the past and the champions of today, telling the stories with reference to who, what, why, where, when, and how can be exciting as well as challenging. Now, joining us on Africa Today, we have Jody Jacobs, TVC News Southern Africa correspondent. Jody, welcome to Africa Today.
Thank you so much, Mike.
It's good to have you here.
Great.
All right. And certainly, as time goes on, we'll be having Mkhozolo Mpolasi on the program subsequently on the second segment of the program. Now, let's start it this way. You have brought in breaking news, several breaking news from South Africa, covered very phenomenal stories, events in South Africa. But let me ask you, how is it generally? Reporting and covering breaking news, challenges and so on, how is it?
I think South Africa is one of the easier countries on the continent to be in. I've done the Zimbabwean elections a couple of times, and that is a difficult country to work in. So South Africa is fairly easy in terms of media access, because people understand that the rights of the media is quite important. So it's not actually all that difficult. The challenging part comes in South Africa is the fact that South Africa as a country has 11 official languages. Okay. So people speak all these languages, and that is probably the most challenging for any reporter who works in South Africa, is that you need to break that mold of the different ethnic and cultural groups. I'm from Cape Town, so it makes it so much easier for me when I go to Cape Town and work in that environment, because I can actually get down to the base of those people and be able to get what I need to get out of them. Where it is more difficult for me to move to the northern parts of the country to then access people and to be able to speak to them, because they speak a completely different language. But overall, in general, South Africa is not really that difficult a country to be a journalist in.
Okay. Well, that's quite interesting to know. All right, but for the past 12 months we've been on, as the case maybe is about a year now, what story or what stories have you reported that you feel, or events that you feel is quite very phenomenal or very significant or maybe even challenging, as the case may be, amongst all the reports you've sent in, as the case may be?
I think that just exactly about a month ago, I think that was probably the most challenging story
Mandela.
that I've ever had to cover. It was 10 days flat out. Not only was I a South African, but I was also a journalist having a responsibility to report to an international audience. So it was quite challenging in that, and I think that...
So you had it on two fronts, the emotions of Mandela on one hand, and then the professionalism of...
Yes, and I've always said this though, I said that as a journalist or as a correspondent, it was only up until the Sunday of the burial that I actually took in what was happening around me. Because from the day of his death up until his funeral, it was working. You were feeding the mass media, really. You were feeding into your audience and giving them the facts as they were being laid out, and telling the story as best you can, making sure that you give the prominence to the story that it so deserved. But at the same time, as a South African, this was our liberation leader. It was the man who made everyone in South Africa be free and enjoy the rights that we have today. And so up until the Sunday, I had not experienced anything until I heard that final salute being rung over the rolling hills of the Eastern Cape in Kunu, that I actually realized what was happening around me. And I think those 10 days summed up my entire journalistic career in those 10 days. I've been doing it for the last 11 years, but that for me was probably the most challenging of stories that I've ever had to cover.
Wow. Well, talking about Mandela, well, on the streets of South Africa, we outside South Africa, people here so much respect, revere Mandela as a case. But on the streets, children, school students, how do they accept this phenomenon that if he were in some quarter, some analysts say sometime that he would have been made a Saint Mandela, something like that, if he were in the Catholic or something. But how do they talk about him?
I don't think you would agree with the fact that we would want to sanctify him, because he was just such a humble, easy human being.
Approachable.
Yeah, and so approachable though. I've been in his presence about 3 times, and just last night, actually, we had this discussion amongst a group of journalists right here in Lagos, actually, and we all shared our experiences of being in the presence of Nelson Mandela. And one of the journalists was saying that you could be slouching, you could be disinterested while sitting in this press conference, but as soon as those doors open and this man walked in, it's as if your body automatically will just sit up straight and you'll just be in awe of this man, because that's just the presence that he portrays. But saying that though, and getting back to your question about kids, everybody knows who Nelson Mandela is. I mean, there's no way you can avoid Nelson Mandela, because the South African government has now just introduced in banknotes in South Africa, the rand is now been changed with the face of Nelson Mandela all of the notes. So he's already in your hand on a daily basis when you are going to the shop to go and buy something. And that is a magnificent way of just immortalizing Nelson Mandela. But no matter who you speak to, I mean, on the day of his death, outside his house home, I had interviewed kids from as young as 4 years old who had come there that night of his death in their pajamas, being brought there by their parents. And they knew exactly what they were doing there. And a story that really touched me outside the Houghton home 3 days after his death, while we were all standing there and seeing people bringing flowers and paying their last respects. And there was this mother with about a 4-year-old kid. And he was tugging on his mother. And I stood there, because I was watching them laying down flowers. And he says, Mommy, you said we're coming to see Nelson Mandela. When is he coming out? And so the child knew who Nelson Mandela was, but didn't understand the enormity of the fact that he was now gone.
All right, Jody, we'll come back to this. The story you're giving us, it really brings the picture very close, the scenario very close for us to see. However, we'll come to this. Now, Africa's largest mining conference is being held in South Africa, but the annual event has been overshadowed by the ongoing industrial action. Nearly 2 weeks of strike by platinum workers or miners has seen outbreaks of violence and is costing the country an estimated $36 million a day. We'll go on a break, and Africa Today returns shortly. Stay with us.
A team of professionals
spread across the continent,
doing justice to African stories
with uncompromising passion,
so you won't miss a beat.
Bringing Africa together, one nation at a time.
All right, we still have Jody Jacobs with us on Africa Today. Jody is a TVC News Southern Africa correspondent, and we've been looking at major socio-economic issues in South Africa. Let's talk about his will. It's one thing that some people are really satisfied that he was able to distribute his whatever he had amongst all people, everyone who had connections with him, as the case may be. But one way or the other, Winnie Mandela was not among the list.
And it's a debate that...
What are people saying about that?
It's a debate that's raging in South Africa at the moment about the fact that Winnie Madikizela Mandela is not included in the will. But one needs to look at this from a holistic point of view. She is the ex-wife of Nelson Mandela. Right. They were legally divorced as a couple. Okay. She no longer has the rights over any of his estate. When they got divorced, she had got her settlement, even though they were married in what is known as community of property in South Africa, where it is a legal document that when you divorce, half of it goes to the husband and half of it goes to the wife. Okay. And Winnie Mandela walked out of that marriage with her particular settlement. Right. So she could not really lay claim to his estate after his death, because he had another wife who he then was also married to in community of property. Okay. And between Gracia Michel and Nelson Mandela, the estate needed to be split in half once again. South Africans, however, don't agree with this, because they still see Winnie Mandela as the mother of the nation. They still see her as that woman figure that kept the flame of Nelson Mandela alive while he was in prison. And they felt that she needed to somehow be mentioned in that will.
Now, you were talking about Winnie Mandela, but let me ask, how is the relationship between Winnie and Marshall?
I think that we've seen that relationship grow over the years, and even as Nelson Mandela was becoming more ill, we'd seen them on pictures together, and we saw them together at the memorial service. We saw them together at the funeral service, very close. And I think they got to an understanding that they both love this man dearly, and that they will stand by his side. And I think that's the sort of relationship that we saw playing out in public. We don't, of course, know what the relationship is behind closed doors, and that's very difficult to tell. With
that's personal or private to them.
With the Mandela family, really. Exactly. Yeah. But they have portrayed quite a united front when they were out in public, and I think that is this type of relationship that we can just think that the two of them have.
Okay. Now, away from Mandela issues now, the current, one of the very phenomenal issues going on now is the strike from the platinum workers, as the case may be. Now, the point there is, employers on one hand, workers on the other hand, this issue has come on and off and on and off. Why hasn't there been any final settlement on this to keep these issues behind?
It's a very controversial issue when you talk about mining in South Africa, because it goes back to the early days of apartheid.
Okay.
And things have not been corrected over the 20 years of democracy. What these mines are seen as the slave havens of the black people in South Africa. Many of them having left the coastal towns and the coastal provinces and the homelands that were set up back in the day for black people to stay. And they had to travel all the way to the north of the country without their families, because they were not allowed to have their families with them. Okay. Only the men, and go up to the platinum mines and to the gold mines, and they lived there in squalor in these dormitories, and it's just all men, and they worked for peanuts. And so that was always the case back in the day. Okay. And it's now about correcting all of that and bringing these people up to a level where they can actually earn a decent living, a living wage, and actually live a normal life. And this is what we've been seeing happening in most of the mining sectors in South Africa. Now, platinum, South Africa produces 70% of the world's platinum.
That's true.
And you would think that there should be sufficient money or resources available to actually pay these workers, but we're not seeing that happening. And the unions have always been accusing these big multinational companies of actually just raping South Africa's resources and sending it abroad, and it's not being plowed back into these workers. And the amount of money that these platinum workers are asking for is exactly the same amount of money that they'd been asking for 2 years ago when that Marikana massacre happened. So they didn't get the money that time already, and now they're pushing for it again because they really want that living wage to be able to continue. Because at the moment, you're still finding men living in these mining towns. Their families are still living in the former homelands, and they have to send money down there. They have to look after themselves, and it's not a living wage. But the companies are saying that it's just not sustainable. They might as well just close up shop if they're going
and
to
everybody
have to.
Goes back home.
Yes, if they are to pay these people the salaries. The reality, though, is that we also need to understand that South Africa's mineral resources are also dwindling, and they're dwindling quite fast. And that in a few years' time, we might not have these big gold mines and these platinum mines in South Africa because of all the years of mining.
Oh, I see. All right. Now, the one other thing is the increase in electricity tariffs and increase in fuel price, as the case may be. We heard a lot of complaints. Well, what are the people talking? What are they saying about that?
And then you've got interest rates.
Exactly.
Interest rates hikes. You've got the electricity. You've got the petrol. It is just all compounding in South Africa, and I think people are becoming more and more frustrating. Of course, this is having a direct effect on the rand exchange. The rand-dollar exchange rate on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange too, and on all the other international markets too, because the rand has just plummeted a week ago to the lowest level that it's ever been in the last almost 10 years. And that is a big concern for South Africa, for South Africans on the ground, because already South Africans are complaining about the fact that their salaries are not increasing. They're having to pay more for electricity. They're having to pay more for fuel. Interest rates hikes. And it's just all compounding, and it's just not sustainable for the ordinary South African to live anymore. And what we are seeing now is in some of the more poorer communities is that people are actually starting to take to the streets. People are actually so frustrated with the administration that they are actually going out into the streets, and we're seeing these protests erupting almost on a daily basis of people actually going onto the streets, burning tires, looting shops, burning down government buildings because of their frustration with the administration. And the ANC will always make this argument and say that it is at local government level, which they are also responsible for. But at local government level is where the issue lies. And those are the people that are on the cold face of supplying South Africans with water, with electricity.
Exactly.
And they are not doing it because there's a rut of corruption inside those local municipalities that are...
Well, from what you've heard, is the government at the center trying to turn around this trend generally?
Well, the ANC has come out very strongly just in a media briefing last week when they were supposed to announce who their list of candidates were for the up-and-coming elections. And the head of the ANC said that, we are actually not finalizing our list yet. We are going to do it in a few more weeks because we actually think that the time has come, as the ANC government, to deploy some of the more competent people in government who have had ministerial posts, to deploy them to local government. And maybe we can do a turnaround in that. So they have come out and they've acknowledged that there's huge problems within local government and that they are thinking now of redeploying some of their most senior cabinet ministers to actually go and work in municipalities in the hope of turning them around.
Wow. Okay, but South Africans, you have listened to people on the streets, normal people, average people, as the case may be. As South Africa approaches the presidential elections as it comes up, what kind of a president or what kind of a leader are they craving to have or looking forward to having?
I think that a lot of hope had been placed in somebody like Mampile Rampele, given her credentials, given where she comes from. She's the ex-partner of one of the greatest struggle heroes of South Africa, Steve Biko. She's an academic. She's worked in the World Bank. And I think a lot of hope from especially urban South Africans had been on the back of Mampile. And they were hoping that she would be the one who would usher in. However, we have politics in South Africa, and we vote for the party, we don't vote for the person into power. So, as much pundits have said that the ANC would go on and win this election, and in that case, Jacob Zuma would then become the president again. But I think that a lot of people have lost so much faith in him. Not only, we saw in that package earlier on, it's not only his homestead in Nkandla that is his issue. He's had that rape case against him that really tainted him, even though he was acquitted of it. He has so many cases of corruption against him that have never even been taken to court for, because the National Prosecuting Authority doesn't intend prosecuting him. So he's got all of this dark clouds hanging over him, and many see him as not a decisive leader. But because they're going to have to vote for the ANC, and they still see the ANC as the party that liberated South Africa, many of them will still continue to vote for the ANC and just make peace with the fact that they, for the next 5 years, will have to stick it out with Jacob Zuma.
All right. Let me ask you this personal question as we round off.
Personal question,
yeah, it's quite personal. But the point there is, South Africa is a wonderful country, as the case may be. You've gone the length and breadth of the country, met with people and so on. Would you like to contest for president one day, maybe? Jody Jacobs,
I think my calling has always been to be in the media, and I don't think I will cross that boundary. Into politics. I've seen what has happened in politics only in the last week in South Africa.
Right.
I don't think I want to be party to that at all. I'll leave that to you, Mike.
Thank you, Jody, for coming on Africa Today. Thank you very much. All right, South Africa is at a political crossroads with elections due in April this year. And many would expect the next president of the Rainbow Nation to tackle the issues of crime, corruption, inequality, unemployment, and poverty. Now, ours is to tell the stories that would inspire development on the African continent, while those are expected to execute it carry out their duties. That's our show for today. You can also watch episodes of the show online on youtube.com/TVC Africa Today. And until the next one, I am Mike Okweche. And remember, this is Africa. Bye for now.